Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our very first Presilium virtual coffee event. We are thrilled to be here with you this morning. We're breaking another attendance record today and are so happy to be able to step back from the financial markets to enjoy an hour with all of you and learn something new. We feel blessed to have clients joining us from all over the world for this event. The entire team at Presilium loves coffee, and we are really excited to do this with some of our favorite people. We have a lot going on at Presilium, and I wanted to use this opportunity while we're all together to give you three important updates. First, all of your final Presilium and Fidelity tax documents have been posted to your Presilium client portal. Our team did an amazing job over the past 5 days, reviewing and posting thousands of tax documents to your client portals. We have also securely emailed your tax documents directly to your accountant if you requested that we do so. Of course, please call or email us if we can help in any way. Second, we are sending you an invitation this afternoon to 2 virtual wine tasting events that we're hosting next month. One will be comparing reds from 3 regions in France, and the other will be on white wines from vineyards grown near volcanoes. Both should be excellent. We would love for all of you to join us at one or both of those events. And finally, we're going to email you a very important emergency drill video tomorrow morning that we feel is one of the most important things you can do as a long-term investor. We are really happy with the way that we navigated the severe market volatility last year, but want to make sure that we're all prepared for the next severe decline while things are relatively calm. Please take 5 minutes to watch the video and participate in our emergency drill tomorrow or this upcoming weekend. We would love for you to send us your feedback after watching the video. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Conrad, our coffee connoisseur, and he's going to guide us through an amazing tasting and learning experience this morning. Please feel free to add questions to the question section on the bottom of your Zoom screen or email them to me during the presentation. Conrad, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Appreciate that. I'm sure everyone's eager to get their caffeine fix, if not their second cup. This could be some first cup, but second cup for me, to be honest. But yeah, before we dive into the coffee, I just want to make sure everyone has enough time to get all their materials ready and together. So if you guys could, go ahead and fill your kettles about 3/4 of the way there. We're not going to need all of that water, but it's just easier to pour that way. So I'll give you guys a quick minute to do that. And then as soon as you're back, we can go ahead and heat the kettles as well.
And Conrad, I know that for me anyway, I'm heating the water separately. I have the pour over machine ready. Yep. And I have boiled water in a measuring cup, and I'm ready to use the pour over with the coffee.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah. So for those that might not have the kettle at hand, then yeah, it can just be simply putting some water into the microwave, getting it at I would say probably 2 minutes would be ample. The temperature does impact the taste in different ways, but it's usually not as dramatic as most people think. We could still have a good time without it. So yeah, I'll go ahead and start my water here. And then as that's getting ready, just to make sure that we all got the right materials, yeah, you guys should have gotten your Chemex kit here with this reusable filter. Pretty cool. So I'm sure you guys are used to seeing a paper filter in a lot of these Chemexes, which is a great method, a great filter to use, but it only has this one dripping point. Whereas with these reusable ones, we have all these filtration holes on the outside, if you'll notice. So you'll see that the coffee is made much quicker that way, and it just allows for easy cleanup. You run under the sink, tap it under the trash can, you're ready for the next one, right? So pretty cool here. And then you guys should have gotten your 3 coffees, your light, medium, and dark roasts, and then your tablespoon measure, as well as your mugs. So as the water is still heating up, I wanted to, one of my favorite parts of coffee is the relational aspect. Of course, coffee brings us together through, different meetings like this today, first thing we do in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. And there's a lot of different things that, coffee does to bring us together outside of just, the tastes and the regions it comes from and things like that. So I always love to share my mug stories, and I'm sure you guys have some really cool mugs too, whether it's places that you travel to, something sentimental, gifts that were given to you. Usually mugs bring out some kind of cool story attached to each person, so it's always a fun thing for me to learn about different people. So my first mug is my Ferrari mug, and this is from when I went to the factory in Modena in Italy. And if there's any car fans in here, you guys will know that Modena is an incredible city for cars. I mean, of course, Ferrari is based there, Lamborghini is based there, Maserati, Pagani, Ducati, the motorcycles also. Really cool for any of the gearheads, right? And the experience was super cool. I got to do the F1 simulator, got to see the cars that were in the movies. So a mug that reminds me of some really good times there. But the city Modena is also known for a couple other things. I'm sure your balsamic vinegar bottles at home will say balsamic of Modena on it, right? And also they're known for their Lambrusco wine, which is kind of like a sparkling red, almost like the Prosecco or the red version of Prosecco. So a lot of different things to do in Modena, and nevertheless, just a mug that reminds me of some great times there. My second mug that I have here is my corporate mug, my Uber mug. It's when I worked it was a little project at the time. It was called Uber Eats that was just launching. And since it's taken off just a little bit, but yeah, this mug and I have spent quite a bit of time together. I had to meet pretty harsh deadlines and had to drink a lot of coffee to get things done. So just another mug that reminds me of some good times there. This was in when I was in New York. And I most recently moved from there down to where I am now in Miami. I'm one of those guys that follow that trend, but been here for a few years now. So I don't think I'm considered a snowbird, as they call it, anymore, right? But yeah, as the water's heating up here, we can go ahead and get the first coffees ready. So if you guys could take your Chemex, take your filter, put it over top, just like that. And then we're gonna open up the light roast first, the Columbia bag, okay? Now, we're gonna be pouring the grounds into the filter that's over top the Chemex using our tablespoon measure, okay? And now this is gonna be based on caffeine tolerance level. So I'm gonna recommend anywhere between 2 to 4 scoops. Personally, I'm gonna stick to 3, and my scoops aren't perfect, so don't worry about that. It's probably 4 scoops that I end up doing, but I just like to convince myself that, I'm not that crazy. Yeah, see, my scoops aren't perfect. So there's 1. There's 2. Here is 3. Awesome. I'm sure as you guys open up these bags, the aromas are coming out, starting to light up the room with some flavor. So when you guys have your grounds in your filter, go ahead and tap it a couple times on the side. What you're going to see is it kind of evens out the grounds. When you poured the coffee in, or rather when you scooped it in, it kind of created this mound. We want it just to be nice and flat, kind of going across like that. And then either with the back of your tablespoon measure, or just with your finger, I just use my finger because it's easier. We're going to create a little divot right in the middle, just like that, about a 1/2 inch deep. And that's where we're going to pour the water at first. Okay, so why are we doing this? So again, when I mentioned the filtration holes are all around the outside of this filter, if we were to pour the water just on the outsides, it'd be missing all those grounds for the most part, right? It'd be dripping out these sides. Whereas when you pour the water in the middle and you create this little divot, the water goes down and it comes up and kind of filters the grounds nice and evenly through. So that's why we've created this little system here. And as the water's still heating up, I figured I'd touch on, what does a light roast What's a medium roast? What's a dark roast? We hear about these things, we sometimes see them in the stores or on the coffee menus, but we don't always know what they mean. And we just kind of pick the bag with the coolest looking packaging or the one that's, being advertised at the coffee shop and cross our fingers and hope for the best, right? Well, each of the roasts comes with a different set of flavors, of course, right? Now, light roast you might not be as familiar with. They're not as common in the typical Starbucks, the Dunkins, things like that, just because they require a higher quality bean. And so it's not as effective or efficient for mass production, right? But light roasts tend to be more fruity and acidic. So if you look at your Columbia back here, we have fruit, honey, and sweet, okay? And just to really wrap your mind around how fruity a light roast can really get, because again, it's not something people are familiar with. I grabbed this bag from the same brand, but it's from Ethiopia. It really helps to kind of understand how fruity coffee can get. So the flavors in this one are raspberry, lemonade, and blueberries. Sounds like a fruit smoothie, right? But then as soon as we start working our way over to the darker coffees, so the medium will combine aspects of the light and the dark, but then the dark roasts, those tend to be more chocolatey, more nutty. So if you look at your dark roast back here in Brazil, we have toffee, almond, and chocolate, right? So we go from fruit smoothie to ice cream, pretty much. At least that's how I like to think of it. So light roasts tend to be more fruity and acidic, dark roast more chocolatey, more nutty. The medium kind of combines the two, okay? So it looks like my water's ready. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour my first roast here. So I'm gonna do it in a way that you guys can see, but the first time we pour the water, again, we're gonna go into the little hole that we created. And as soon as that water creeps out of that hole, we're gonna just start doing some laps around the outside until the water hits this top silver rim. Then we'll let the water filter through, okay? And we're gonna do a couple rounds of pouring. The second one's a little different. I'll go over how we're gonna do that one in a second. All right, so I'm gonna start pouring into that hole right there, just like that. And then as soon as that water creeps out, just like it did, I'm just doing some laps around the outsides, ring around the rosy, until the water hits this top silver rim. That, just let it filter through. You guys see how quick it's filtering through, right? I'm sure with the paper filters that you guys have seen before, it's just like, I mean, it's not as dramatic as watching paint dry, but it's, drip, drip, right? So this is much quicker, still leads to a really good cup of coffee. But yeah, so you'll notice that as soon as you poured the water in, the coffee grounds kind of start to get stuck on the outsides, right? So the whole point of the Chemex is we have control over where the water is going. So we want to incorporate all the grounds that we can, typically, right? So if you look at like a normal coffee machine that has that little water thing that goes over the filter, it's only dropping the water at one point typically. Whereas with this, we're able to use all the grounds, right? Make sure everything's incorporated. So only the freshest, most readily available flavor compounds are going to be what come down to the bottom here. So with the second round of pouring, we're going to actually do the opposite of what we did the first time. So what I like to do is do a quick lap around the outsides just to get those grounds off those walls that it got stuck on, and then bring the water back to center after that one lap. And then same thing, fill it up until it hits this top silver rim, and then we let it filter through. All right. Okay. So one lap around the outside, bring the water back to center. It's the top silver rim, and we let it filter through. So sometimes people will use a scale to measure the exact coffee grounds to water ratio, which definitely is helpful. But in terms of convenience and the real taste difference, unless you're really sitting down and processing the flavor, I wouldn't say there's that dramatic of a difference with the exact ratios. And this is more just for fun, where you guys can have a good understanding as to, how you can take this into the office, take it with you wherever you go, and just make a good quality cup of coffee without any stress, right? Without any worries about exact ratios. But I'm sure there are some people that would like to do those things. So I occasionally will, just to test the differences. But for the ease of the experience, this is how we're doing it. So the amount that we're going to get in here is about an industry standard cup size. So we're looking at about 200 milliliters, right? 175 to 200. Now, if you look at the sizes, when we go to these cafes, right? We look at like Starbucks, for example, right? We have tall, grande, and venti, right? The tall is almost double the size of this, right? It's kind of like when you go to the bar and you order a shot and you're like, what is this little thing? The ones at home, they're double the size. Similar idea, but it just gives you a good perspective as to how much we're really consuming, right? So when you hear or read that a cup of coffee has what is it, like between 60 to 80 milligrams of caffeine, that's a cup. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the small size at the cafe that you go to. That could be double that. So just something to keep in mind. But once your water has filtered through, go ahead and take your filter, take one of your available mugs, just place it over top. Should fit over most of them just like that. Doesn't have to be perfect. Place that off to the side. Okay. And then grab your other available mug and then pour the coffee through. Right. Awesome. Now, don't be too quick to sip it. It is going to be pretty hot. I mean, my insurance is good, but not, is it close to 50 people good? So haven't had any accidents yet, but just proceed with caution. Don't take the sip too quickly. All right. I swear there's something about drinking coffee in a Ferrari mug that just doubles the caffeine. And I'm in Miami, where there's consistently Ferraris all over the place. So it definitely adds to the experience. But as this cools off, I figured I'd touch on, caffeine. It's probably a topic that everyone wants to hear about, right? So what is the deal with caffeine? So I'm going to break a myth. Okay. A lot of people think that dark roasts have the most caffeine. And it makes sense. They taste very strong. It feels like you're getting punched in the face with all this flavor. You would expect it to be a stronger type of cup, right? But it's actually light roasts that have the most caffeine. So light roast is what we're having here with this first cup. And the reason why is because light roasts spend the least amount of time roasting in the oven. Dark roasts spend the most amount of time roasting in the oven. And just for ease of explanation, it's just less of that caffeine content is roasted off on the light roast. So light roasts have the most caffeine from that aspect. Now, also there's coffee beans that have their caffeine processed before even going into the roaster. The green coffee beans you might see on in many of the beverages that go around these days, where it'll say green coffee bean caffeine extract, right? So that's even more caffeine in that content of the bean before it even gets to the roaster. So just to kind of wrap your head around that. I think my coffee's good to sip now, so I'm going to give it a try here. Yeah, notice that acidity that just kind of like karate punches you in the face, right? Or boxing punches you in the face. It's something that I'm sure most of you guys aren't used to, coming with, from medium roast, darker roast that you might get at some of these coffee shops. Yeah, the fruitiness and the acidity immediately hits you. So I'm sure it's a much different experience than you may be used to. But yeah, and a common question people ask me, and one that might be going through your head right now, is what's the deal with creamers? And, is it illegal to put any creamer into the coffee? coming from someone that's, teaching these classes, in my eyes, you're drinking this coffee every day, right? So if you have a preference of something, do whatever you got to do to make it taste good, right? Whether that's adding a certain creamer, whether that's Jameson for some people, do your thing. There's no judgments. It's not like wine where, we can see if anyone's adding anything into the glass, which of course they don't. But with coffee, the glasses are usually covered. I mean, some people might have the clear glasses, but point being, do your thing. How I do it is I try to pair the elements of the coffee with whatever I'm adding to it to try to potentially enhance that experience, right? So with light roasts, I tend to just drink those black because it's kind of difficult to find things to pair it with in the sense of like creamers. So there's not really many fruity creamers that could pair well with the light roast other than occasionally, coconut. Sometimes there's roasts that have coconut flavors in it and that could enhance that experience. But for the most part, I drink light roast black because especially coming through a Chemex where the flavor is a little bit more clear than the other methods of brewing. When I say clear, it's just not as intense. You can much more easily identify different flavors of the coffee through the Chemex. That's why it's actually one of the more preferred methods of brewing coffee amongst many enthusiasts. But for dark roasts, on the other hand, so if we look at our bag here, that we have toffee, we have almond, chocolate. Oftentimes we'll get hazelnut too. So hazelnut, there's hazelnut creamers. If you have a hazelnut creamer, add that in there, and that can help to enhance that experience. So that's kind of how I go about it. Light roast, usually drink those black. Dark roasts, I'll try to pair whatever the flavor aspects are with it, right? Because usually with light roasts, if you just put in like a specific type of creamer, it'll kind of take away from that fruity experience that you may be, experiencing right now. Especially when you have a roast with raspberries, lemonade, and blueberries, like this one that I showed earlier.
Hey, Conrad, we had our first question.
Awesome.
A number of our guests use the Ember mug that can keep it at a set temperature.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommended temperature to either make the coffee or to keep the coffee at to enjoy the flavors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't experienced the Ember mug, but it is the hot topic these days. So I guess to kind of backtrack and give some perspective of how the coffee's brewed first, the ideal temperature that we're looking for with using a Chemex is around 206, 205 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So with and that's when we're pouring it. Boiling is about, 212, 213. And so it's just letting it cool off just a little bit. Now, do you want to be sipping your coffee at that temperature? Probably not. That's just for brewing. For keeping it warm, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to just throw a number out there, then people start to burn themselves. But I would assume maybe on the packaging or on the directions, it might give some recommended temperatures. That's a good question. I'm usually quick to sip my coffee so it doesn't sit around for too long. But the Ember mug is definitely something I'm going to be checking out just so I can keep the cup warm throughout the day. But going into the next roast. So once you guys have finished the first roast, go ahead and take your filter, the one that you placed over top your available mug or your other available mug, and just tap it under the trash can a couple times, run it under the sink. Then if you'd like as well, pour some water into the Chemex, swish it around a little bit, pour it out just so we have a fresh one for the next coffee. So I'll give you guys a quick minute or so to do that.
And Conrad, we just had our next question.
Yeah.
This is from my good friend Todd right here in Pennsylvania.
Nice.
How does making it in the Chemex compare to making it in something like a French press? Does the flavor any different between the two?
Great question. Love that one. Yeah, it does differentiate. So the way that you can compare the two is the amount of time that the grounds are marinating for. So that's a big impact to many different parts of the coffee. But likewise with caffeine. So the longer that, not just the type of roast, like the light roast, But the longer that the grounds are required to marinate for with the brewing method, the more caffeine will be absorbed too. That's why if you've had a nitro cold brew, or any cold brew for that matter, from the Starbucks, Dunkin's, wherever, and you feel like a pinball machine afterwards, that's why, because the cold brew marinates for the longest period of time. Now, comparing those two, Chemex to a French press, Chemex is going to be a little bit more of a lighter flavor experience in terms of, like I mentioned before, where you can easily identify the different flavors. Whereas a French press, because it's marinating for a little bit of a longer period, usually between 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the flavor profile you're trying to achieve, it will taste a little bit more intense, like all the flavors are combining at once and kind of melded together, as opposed to different notes at different periods, right? And the color is going to be a little bit darker because you are pressing the water down in terms of a French press. So for French press, how I recommend doing it, which actually this is a common mistake that people make when brewing a French press, once you pour the water in, right, and you'll just let it sit over top the grounds, right? You'll let the water sit there for 5 minutes. It'll create this crust after those 5 minutes that you'll just break up with your spoon, and then you let it sit for another 5 minutes or so. Then as over that time, those grounds are going to start coming down to the bottom and just separating themselves from the main core of the liquid, right? And now oftentimes people will be quick to take the French press filter and just press it down all the way, right? Where there's this, the plate that just presses it down. And what that does is it just brings all those grounds back into the liquid. So then you'll have this kind of like sludge at the bottom of your cup. Whereas instead, what you want to do, or what I recommend, is just push that filter down just under that initial water level. So if this is, let's say this is the water level, just pushing it down right about there and letting the filter just sit there and pour it that way, because the grounds will stay at the bottom and then you'll be able to pour it and not have all that sludge at the bottom of your cup. So, because that could change the flavor experience too. As you're sitting there, you might be swishing it around and you might get this really intense sip of coffee because of that, it mixed in with that sludge. So that's how I'd recommend it. So Chemex, lighter type of experience because the water filters through much quicker. I don't want to say it's watered down, but it's just more fresh, because only the freshest, most readily available flavor compounds are what's filtering through, right? The water's just grabbing what it can and filtering it through. That's why we do 2 rounds of pouring, to make sure that we get all of those fresh grounds that are in there to filter through. So that's how I would compare the two. But to finish that point I touched on with caffeine, where it's not just the type of roast, light, medium, dark, light being the highest level of caffeine. It's also the brewing method in terms of the one that requires the grounds to marinate for with the longest period will have the most caffeine. Cold brews usually marinate between 9 to 72 hours, depending on the flavor profile the individual is trying to achieve. Then next step down is French press, 5 to 10 minutes. Next step down is Chemex, usually with a paper filter, so it does take longer, like a minute or so. But in this case, it's within seconds. And then there's espresso. And a lot of people are like, wait, hold on. I thought espressos had the most caffeine, right? In terms of volume, they do. Because just for the little shot compared to like a cup of coffee, it is a lot. But the cup of coffee, like if you're getting, like a medium coffee or even a small coffee compared to an espresso, the small coffee is going to have more caffeine just because of the sheer volume that it has. Now, of course, it's a different type of roast. But if you were to fill that same small size coffee cup with a bunch of espressos, that's a different story. You'd be bouncing off the walls, right? Now, one thing that I will say, in case anyone's curious of it, what's the best bang for your buck in terms of caffeine? I know everyone here probably has tons of meetings, has to be alert, giving presentations, things like that. I don't see anyone doing this. So if you want to take it and run with it, go ahead. Light roasts have the most caffeine, right? The cold brews absorb the most caffeine because they marinate for the longest period. I don't see anyone making light roast cold brews. Everyone usually does medium dark. No one's tried it yet. So if you want to take it, run with it, go ahead. I will preface that after drinking that, you will be feeling like a pinball machine. So could be for safety reasons why it hasn't been created yet, but nevertheless, it's an idea to throw out there. So now that you guys have your Chemex all cleaned up and ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and start the second one here. So I'm going to start my water. And we're going to jump over to the dark roast, just so you guys can see that dramatic difference from one to the next. Okay. So I'm going to open my bag here.
And Conrad, while you're doing that, we had another question.
Yeah.
From my good friend Jennifer, right up the road from you in Jupiter, Florida.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
When making iced coffee, do you prefer the cold brew or making it hot and then pouring it over ice?
Ooh, good question. So personally, I prefer the cold brew because I know it comes with more caffeine, but that's just a me thing with caffeine. But it really depends on how you like the coffee. So a common over ice, I guess, thing that I do is when it's not cold brews, will just be an Americano, which is 2 shots of espresso, hot water, or it can be cold water in this point. But what usually will happen is they'll make at coffee shops, just for perspective, they'll do 2 shots of espresso, pour the hot water over, and then add the ice in. I usually just like to, and I might not be the best example because I'm always like thinking about these different flavor aspects, how everything blends in together. I try not to add too many things to my coffee, especially with light roasts. So an Americano could be a little bit intense tasting for some people. So it depends on the type of coffee you enjoy, whether it's with, additives and things like that, like the Java chip Frappuccino at Starbucks is awesome. I love ice cream. So there's 2 sides to me. It's like the coffee purist, but also the sweet tooth that kicks in. There's not too much in between. It's depending on how I'm feeling on those 2 ends. But personally, I prefer cold brew just because it's going to have that the most caffeine there, and it marinated for the longest period. So it's this really intense experience of all this flavor, right? Not quite as light as a Chemex might taste. All right, so going to dive into this dark roast here. So this is going to be one that you guys are a little bit more familiar with. Okay, so same thing applies. 2 to 4 scoops, depending on your caffeine tolerance level, again, into the filter that's over top the Chemex. All right, so again, I'm sticking to 3, and once again, my scoops aren't perfect, so that's probably 4, 4.5, right? All right, there we go. Awesome. So once the grounds are in there, once again, just tap the side real quick. Make that little divot either with your finger or the back of the tablespoon measure. We got another question?
Yes, thanks, Conrad. This one is from my good friend David, who is woken up early to join us in Palm Springs, California.
Oh, yeah.
He had asked about the pour over method. Could you explain how that's different and if there is an ideal temperature to prepare it that way?
Yeah. So the pour over is the Chemex. That is what we're using here. There's just a couple different people usually toss around the names. So the ideal way to prepare it, ideal temperature for the Chemex that we're doing here is between 205 to 206 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if your water is like a little bit above it or a little bit below it, I don't think it's going to make the biggest difference, transparently. There are the perfectionists, though. If your kettle does tell you the temperature, why not? Do it if you can. But if it doesn't, it's what I would recommend is once it hits the boiling point, just let it cool off or let the kettle sit there for 30 seconds to 45 to a minute. Really depends on, there's not an exact answer. It depends on the temperature of your house that's impacting the kettle, things like that. But just let it cool off a little bit after it hits the boiling point. So that would be, I guess, the ideal temperature. But everything outside of that is what we've been doing. So pour over Chemex, they're the same thing, just one's more of like a name that was coined. It kind of looks like, I guess, a chemistry project, right? The water's dripping down. It looks like a beaker. It looks like something might be blowing up, but it's not, other than hopefully our energy levels that will be crushing it throughout the day. But yeah, I know there's oftentimes confusion around that, but yeah, pretty much the same thing here. But one thing that's interesting is that the Chemex is actually similar to a contraption that we use in the wine world, which I'm sure there's a lot of wine fans here, right? Kind of looks like a decanter, and it acts similarly too. There's a lot of similarities between coffee and wine. And I love wine, so don't take this next statement the wrong way, but there's about 650 more flavor compounds in coffee than there are in wine. So just to give you an idea of like the flavor manipulation that can be done amongst the two. And of course, wine, there's, you know, a ton that can be done. People just never usually think about it in terms of coffee, because we don't really have these, you know, we don't have the Napa Valley, the Temecula's, those wine country experiences for coffee in the US. But it's similar to that when you go abroad, when you go to some of these countries like Colombia, Brazil, Nicaragua, Ethiopia, Costa Rica, where you go to those farms and you have a similar type of tasting experience. You see how they manipulate the flavors, the ground, how they pick the coffee beans. Really cool experience there. But back to the Chemex and the decanter. You guys have, you know, been to a restaurant, you've ordered your bottle of wine, and the server comes to you and they pour a little bit into your glass. You know, you swish it around, and some of you might know what you're doing. Others will just, you know, pretend like they're, you know, like they're experts. You'll give it a sniff, you'll give it a taste, and you'll accept it, right? Cool. Then, and this usually is with the older bottles, or at least it's more dramatic of an effect with the older bottles. They'll pour the wine into the decanter, which sometimes can look similar to this Chemex. And the taste from the point that you tried it in that initial taste test to where you let the bottle open up through the decanter, or just let air get into it, it could taste like a completely different bottle. I mean, sometimes it's just mind-blowing, and it just acts like this living thing. It's crazy. And coffee acts similarly in a Chemex. Not quite as dramatic, I will be honest, but you will notice that different parts of the coffee will shine at different points. So from the initial taste, you might taste, you know, in this Brazil one, more of the toffee initially. Then as it cools off, more of that chocolate could start to creep in and dominate the initial flavor profile that, you know, hits your palate. So I've always found that to be super fascinating, that it acts like this living thing, and this method really creates this really cool and unique experience that gives you these different flavors at different points. So yeah, nevertheless, once your water is ready here, we're going to go ahead and pour the next one. So same thing, we're going to, for the first round of pouring, we're just pouring into that little divot that we created. And as soon as that water creeps out, we're doing some laps around the outside till the water hits the top silver rim. We let it filter through. So while that's filtering through, another thing, because I know that, oh, sorry, got a question?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Conrad.
Yeah.
I know in the Presilium headquarters where I'm located, we plan on drinking all of this today and having a very effective day. But for
Awesome.
anyone who doesn't finish all of it, what's the best way to store these?
Good question. So I would just say a room temperature. So these bags have these little slits where it just allows air to flow through them. So there's no like molding that happens. I know there's another myth that people think that putting them into the freezer will keep them fresher. And it honestly doesn't do anything to the actual contents of the coffee and changing or keeping it fresher in that sense. It might taste like that, or maybe some people have experienced a taste difference like that when they pull it directly out of the freezer and then pour this hot water onto it. And there might be a little bit more of I guess, a fresh tasting experience, but it really doesn't do much to it. So I would just say at room temperature in your cupboard, even on your office desk, wherever you are, these can sit there for quite a while. So you'll be good. And you guys got plenty of coffee here, so hopefully you don't consume all of it. If you do, I'm very impressed by your caffeine tolerance level. I've been training mine for a long time, and that would be a lot. But yeah, once your guys' water is filtered through here with the first one, same thing with the second round of pouring, where we're actually going to go around the outsides first and then bring the water back to center. So we're going around the outsides just to scoop those grounds that got stuck there. And I just do a quick little lap. I bring the water back to center there, let it hit the top silver rim, and I let it filter through. So you guys might be curious as to, why is this kettle different than all the other ones for the most part? Why is it, this is called a gooseneck. So really the main purpose of it is just to allow for a slow and controlled pour. You can really aim the water exactly where it's going. Whereas with typical teapots, you just have that one little hole, or, it's just usually this ending here, and the water could just potentially splat everywhere, so you don't have as much control. Whereas this just allows you exactly to direct the water where to place it. So that's the purpose behind that. But one thing that, since you guys are, you guys are going to the grocery store, you're buying your own coffee or however you're doing it, just to give you a sense of, or just to give you some perspective for the next time that you go to buy coffee, how you can, look at the different coffees and know what to expect. So you guys know at this point now that light roasts are fruity and acidic, dark roasts are more chocolatey, nutty, right? But another thing to consider, because not all the coffee bags at the grocery stores or online, however you're buying it, they won't always give the amount of detail that, these bags have or some of the other brands. But one thing to keep in mind is if they have the country listed on the bag, you can get a sense as to what to expect. So the higher the elevation, typically, the lighter the roast. So the more fruity and acidic it'll be. So if you're not great in terms of knowing, which country has a high elevation, low elevation, it's fine. Just a quick Google search, and then you'll know, or at least be able to expect a certain set of flavors, right? So just something to keep in mind as you guys go around and do your coffee purchasing. But yeah, as soon as your water filters through, go ahead and take your filter, get your other available mug, put it over top, place that to the side, and then pour the next coffee through. Looks like we got another question.
Yes, Conrad. This time from Kelly in Austin, Texas.
Nice.
How do the grocery store coffees hold up, especially the ones that are pre-made and they're in a can or are pre-made cold brew, things like that?
Yeah, so grocery store ones, they're meant to sit on the shelves for the most part. It depends on the type of grocery store you're going to. Usually the larger the grocery store, like, when we're talking like Walmart, Target, that type of thing, those coffees tend to be made to sit on the shelves for a long time. Okay. Are they going to be the best quality? Most likely not. But usually with the smaller types, actually even at Whole Foods and places like this where they value like, potentially a higher quality, they'll have better quality coffee that will actually have the roast date shown on it, just like with these bags, how we have the date shown right there, right? So this was just a couple weeks ago. So yeah, I would say in terms of, I guess if you're trying to get a sense of, how long to hold on to this type of coffee, or if you get like a freshly roasted one, how long before it goes bad or loses its flavor profile, that type of thing, I would say within a month to 2 months. So I would try to purchase, depends on the brand again and how soon it was roasted, but I would say to try to consume in month increments. So if you're buying a bag of coffee or a couple bags that were freshly roasted, try to have it within that month. After that, the flavor profile will start to, I guess, not be as fresh. You'll notice it. I mean, like if you take the same type of bag and you take one that was freshly roasted to one that was been sitting around for a few months, you'll notice the color gets a little bit darker in the grounds. So when you open up the bag with these ones, you'll notice that it's a pretty light brown color because they were roasted fairly recently, right? If you guys can really see that with the lighting, but the more it sits around, the darker it'll get, and it'll lose more of that that fluffiness that the grounds still have, and it'll kind of start to shrivel. So yeah, I would say within try to get it within the, or use them within the month. But that's not to say again that those other coffees that sit around for longer aren't good. They definitely are, but just something to consider here. But yeah, once you guys are ready and comfortable, go ahead and take the sip of this one. This is going to be a little bit more familiar to what you guys probably have tried in the past. Yeah, the acidity is not there. It's more of that chocolatiness that I'm getting initially. And once it starts to cool off again, notice when we talked about the Chemex compared to the decanter, or pour over compared to the decanter, different flavors will start to creep in there. But yeah, one thing as we get close to wrapping up here, I figured I'd touch on is how I got into coffee, because it is a little bit of a, I guess, unique way, not a traditional sense. I wasn't drinking coffee from a young age, this type of thing. But one of my passions outside of coffee is social impact. Love doing just random acts of kindness. And as I mentioned, I was in New York before coming here to Miami. I was in New York for a couple of years, so this was started 5 years ago. And one thing I love to do is to just pay for the person's coffee behind me in line. And it's pretty amazing to see what, like a $3 espresso, whatever they order, can do to someone's day. We hear this common saying of you never know what someone's going through, but you don't really understand it until you really see it. And so as I was in New York, every week I'd go to different cafes because they have hundreds of them. I never run out of them. And I would go in and not only ask what the cafe was known for and try that. And, one time that'll be a light roast. Next time that'll be a dark roast. Third time that'll be a matcha Nutella latte with all this whipped cream and stuff, right? But, I would try out all these different coffees. And over time, I realized, wow, like I've developed quite a palate for coffees. Like I'm pretty good at this now, right? Just like with wine, once you have a bunch of it, you get better at identifying the different flavors. You can even guess the regions, things like that. But after a couple of years of doing this, yeah, I just paying for people behind me. I mean, the chain reactions that I've witnessed that some have created, it really opens your mind, or it blows your mind rather. There was one that I'll never forget where I just paid for the coffee for the person behind me. Very grateful. Everyone was smiling. The barista was happy. They just created this really positive energy in there. And then I went about my day. And then I came back because I was crossing through and I was like, what? I'll just get another espresso. Same lady's working at the counter. And she's like, hey, it's still going. You got to keep it going. It was going on for 2 hours, right? Since I left. So things like this, I mean, I definitely suggest that you guys try it out. It's really fun to do, just to, make someone's day. And it's such an easy way to do it. But yeah, so after doing, just from having that passion of philanthropy, I started to experience coffee just from going to all these different coffee shops that way. Now, one thing I found out about afterwards, and this was once I moved to Miami, actually, so this was a few years ago. I didn't know this before, but there's a tradition in Naples, Italy, called caffè sospeso, which just translates to suspend coffee. And this tradition has been going on for many, many years there. And I found this so cool. And what the tradition is basically, if you've been to Italy, it's like a 5 espresso a day type of culture, right? Whenever something good happens in someone's day in Naples, the next coffee that they go to get, they pay one forward, right? Now, good thing, score a goal in your pickup soccer game, you get a promotion at work, you I don't know, you get recognized for making a certain deadline, whatever the case is. The next coffee that they go to get, they pay for another one. Even if there's no one behind them in line, they have a system. And you'll notice this in the different cafes amongst Naples. It's either a tally system on the board behind them or just like a little piece of paper in a jar. So when the next person comes in there, the barista is like, hey, the person before you was having a good day. It's your turn to carry it forward. So I thought that was really amazing and beautiful that it's something that's been going on for, many, many years. And it's something that I just, happened to start experiencing in New York, where a town that most people think is little rude. People don't have time to say please and thank you, but it was an opportunity for me. And I think people are nicer than we think, especially if you just give them the time to slow down and pay for their coffee. They're really appreciative. But nevertheless, hope that you guys, got an awesome coffee experience here. I know that we didn't get to the medium roast, but I definitely encourage you guys to try it out. It's going to combine both of the aspects of light roast and dark roast with the flavors. A little bit less acidity than that light roast, but basically just medium in between, right? And hopefully now you guys have an idea as to how to, or what to look for when you go to, make your coffee purchasing decisions, and have a better sense of flavors and what could resonate with you. But yeah, at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jerry. Thank you, man. I appreciate you having me here.
Thank you so much, Conrad. That was amazing and really interesting. We will definitely do this again with you. And thank you so much for telling us the stories along the way. I look forward to paying it forward later today, if I can handle any more coffee this afternoon. And I think that's a wonderful thing and something the world needs more of.
Great.
And a special thank you to all of our wonderful clients that joined us this morning. You are all incredibly important to us, and we really value the trust that you have placed in us to reach your financial goals and for your many years of friendship. Please look for the invitation to our April wine tasting events later today and our special emergency investment drill video in your email inbox tomorrow morning. Thank you. We hope you all have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.